I'd like to close with a reflection back on a comment that I've heard you make where you say that ultimately our mandate as Christians is to preach the gospel and to defend the truth. And my question is, if we were to drop into future history 20 years down the road and look back, how has the world changed if we really do make these two our top priorities?
Well, that expression, preach the gospel and defend the truth, comes from Jerzy Papalusko, who was a Catholic priest in Poland. Frail little fellow, used to stand up on the balcony of St. Stanislaw Cathedral every Sunday. Outdoors, people would gather, thousands would gather in the courtyard of that church, and he would preach that week after week. Overcome evil with good, by preaching the gospel and by your actions and living the gospel, and defend the truth. Overcome evil with good, defend the truth. The communists were so offended by that because that was a subversive message in a communist culture that they kidnapped him, they drove him off the road one night. They did everything they could to stop him. They couldn't. Eventually they kidnapped him and his body turned up days later, floating in the Vistula River. He'd been tortured to death. The people came out in the streets and the communists expected a riot and they had tanks in every corner. They didn't. The people marched and said, "We forgive, we forgive, we forgive." He had taught them well that you overcome evil with good, you preach the gospel, you live the gospel, and you defend the truth. By defending the truth, he meant don't buy a lie. I devoted this book, The Good Life, to the pursuit of truth. What it means, the whole last half of the book, is about how you can know truth. Of course, as Christians, we know the truth because Jesus says, "I am the truth." Ultimate reality is in Jesus Christ. The Logos is the beginning and end of everything. The Logos is the source of all energy and matter and life, and that's Jesus. We translated the word, but it means the Logos is a much bigger term to the Greeks, was a much bigger term to the Greeks. So if you really understand this, then you're going to be able to fend off the people who tell you that truth doesn't matter, truth isn't knowable. You're going to be able to defend what you believe. If you can't defend what you believe, you're not going to influence anybody around you, not even going to influence your own family. The second thing is you've got to be preaching the gospel, overcoming evil with good, every day, both in word and deed. In other words, how you live your life will often be a much more powerful message to people than what you say. Particularly as that's so, I know we're nearing the end of the interview and I don't want to prolong this, but this is a really important point. Particularly is this so in the postmodern era. We have to remember that most people don't use our language. We will say something like, the truth makes you free. And a postmodern person hears that and he thinks, the truth, that's my choice. I mean, I can choose my own truth. I like that. Make me free, all restraints off. I can pick what I want to do and I'm free to do it. Of course, it doesn't mean that at all. The truth means Jesus will set you free. It means set you free from sin and death. So we mean one thing, they mean something else. Francis Schaeffer, whose writings influenced me so much, used to say we need to be missionaries to our own culture. He said that 25 years ago. All the more today do we have to be missionaries to our culture. We have to learn how the other side thinks, how other people think. We have to learn how to be discerning of their values. We have to learn how to critique them intelligently and winsomely. Don't go to people and hit them over the head with a Bible, but explain things to them in terms they understand. And if we did this, we would evangelize this country. This could be absolutely transforming of this country. And we got 40% of the American people in church every Sunday. Just give me 10% of them that understood this, and you would really dramatically change this country.
Chuck, you have just written and published this wonderful book, The Good Life. Yet, in your own personal situation, you've hit some very difficult challenges.
Yeah,
how does it all connect?
Okay, this has been the hardest year of my life, John, I think, because The one thing I feared most in the world, that you'd have a son or a daughter in trouble or physical jeopardy, life in jeopardy. Right after I wrote The Good Life, I learned that my oldest son had cancer of the spine, and it resulted in a 10-hour operation, a terrible operation, to get it removed, and then he's been in extensive chemo and continues today. I thought to myself, if somebody a few years ago had told me I'd have that happen with a child, I'd just think I'd go to the nearest bridge and jump off. But a month later, my daughter, who's so precious to me, I've written about her in The Good Life. She's a single mom raising an autistic child, and she's just a heroine to me. She developed a melanoma on her leg, and melanoma can be a very dangerous form of cancer. I was back in the same hospital, different waiting room, when she was operated on. And this all took place in a period of 3 or 4 months. I had just written The Good Life, and The Good Life talks about you can have a good life. It's not the general public perception of a good life of hedonism. It's a good life in pleasure. It's a good life of dignity and purpose and meaning and giving yourself away and finding truth. But when I wrote The Good Life, one of my good friends, Richard Newhouse in New York, critiqued it for me. And he said, you know, it's a great book, but he said it paints kind of a rosy picture. What happens when things fall apart? Well, that was a prophetic comment, because within a few months they did. What I discovered was what I thought would be unimaginable and unbearable. God gives you the grace to sustain. That's an existential response. I mean, I just discovered grace when I never thought it was possible. Yeah. I found myself feeling guilty sometimes because I was at peace, and I thought I shouldn't be at peace. I should be tearing my clothes off and ripping my hair out. I had a lot of sleepless nights. I had a lot of agonizing moments in the waiting room. But this summer I was away at a friend's house in North Carolina, and I was standing on the porch looking out at the mountains and the Smoky Mountains rising up through the mist and the clouds scudding by. It's a beautiful sight, and you just are so convinced of the reality of God. God is. And what struck me when I was watching that was that God's not a product of my feelings. Maybe I'm not feeling really close at some point to God, but God is still God. Yeah. And so our relationship with God does not depend upon our emotions, our feelings. Doesn't even depend on whether He answers our prayers. It doesn't depend on whether He puts us through tough times or good times. God is God, and He created us. And my life and my children's life, their destiny is in His hands. And when it suddenly hit me, I remembered also something else Newhouse had once wrote in his book, As I Lay Dying, which is a wonderful book. I refer to it in The Good Life. Newhouse said when he was lying in the bed and thought he was dying, that he said the great formulation of modern thought was Descartes, sat in the Dutch oven, the Frenchman, trying to figure out the meaning of life, and he came out of it several hours later and he said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And that changed the whole way the Western world thought for years. Newhouse said, as I was lying in the bed dying, I thought he shouldn't have said that. He should have said, cogitor ergo sum. I was thought, therefore I am. And we exist and live only because God gives us the life that sustains us. And so even when things are tough, when the world rolls over on top of you, there is a good life, not that it's without anxiety, pain, suffering, but it is the certain knowledge God is.
Well, you're redefining the good life in that manner is a huge contribution in itself, because we face obstacles every day.
Everybody
and
does.
How we approach that
Yeah.
in faith, in Christ, makes all the difference, doesn't it?
I don't know how you'd face it without faith in Christ. And I must say that, as I said in the introduction of this book, if you haven't had problems, if the world hasn't rolled over on top of you once or twice, please write me, because you'll be the only person I know that hasn't happened. I mean, life is not a bowl of cherries, as Erma Bombeck once said. It's a tough grind to get through this life. It's a spiritual testing period. And sometimes the test can be pretty heavy. I mean, I've been in prison. I've seen my career smashed. I've ended up on an operating room table with an infection and almost died. 3 major surgeries. And now I've had 2 kids very sick and in some peril. I mean, life is not easy. It gives you a lot of empathy for other people, a lot of sympathy for other people, but it also can really strengthen your faith.
And forges something in us that can help us help others.
Exactly.
A friend of mine said, never trust a man who doesn't have a limp.
Yeah,
And
right.
there's something to that,
There's
isn't there?
a lot to that, great deal to that. We all have our limps. Thank you.
Thank you.